The weekend is here. Happy Friday, sports bettors across the nation. I'm Greg Waddell, joined by Doug Kezirian. Troy Macker will join us later in the show. It's another episode of The 10, and we have a great slate of Big Ten sports to discuss with you today. We've got a bunch of basketball games this weekend. We will preview and give best bets along the way. But first, we're going to open the show with a closer look at the national championship game. The Indiana Hoosiers in Miami against Miami. Fernando Mendoza back in his hometown. Indiana is favored by 8.5 at Bet Rivers as we speak. The total is 47. Both those numbers have jumped around a bit throughout the week, but at least for now, this seems to be where the line has stabilized. Doug and I took an early look at this earlier this week. We're going to talk about props in this game as well in just a moment. But Doug, let's just start with this. Any further thoughts? Has anything changed from your thoughts earlier in the week? Kind of not knowing what to do with the number in this spot.
Not a ton. For me, I'm at Miami lean, but then eventually I think I'm going to be on Indiana in the second half. I just need to see how it plays out. I really want to process and extract sort of analysis watching the trenches for the first quarter and a half. Look, that's the only way to disrupt this Hoosier squad is to blow up the offensive line. They have such a dominant sort of advantage over their opponents with that, but that's also the Canes' strength. So that's why I just need to see how it plays out. As much as I love Indiana and as much as I'm rooting for this improbable story to come to completion and actually win the national championship, they have had some times where they had some coin flip outcomes, like the Ohio State game, like the Iowa game, Penn State game. I mean, they've trucked the last two playoff opponents, but that hasn't been the case at other points of the season. I also trust Zignetti to make game time adjustments, and I think it's a superior staff. I think they'll be all business, but it's one game, and the ball can bounce funny ways. It's a round sphere with 2 points. So don't forget that. With that being said, I think Indiana gets it done. I don't think we're going to have a blowout. So nothing's changed much since we last spoke. I'm excited about getting into the props, but I do think there'll be some late money on this game. It'll remind me of sort of the Ohio State-Miami game where the Canes got late steam and it got down to 7.5. I think we'll see some Miami money, even though I know I've talked to odds makers who are fearing the huge recreational bets on the favorite. I think ultimately the sharp money will move this. Keep it at 8.5. I don't think it's going much higher.
Yeah, the more I've sat on this, I feel like I'm just a little bit reinforced or emboldened on some of my opinions on our first show earlier this week. But my general outlook for this game is I want to be on Indiana. I don't think this number is favorable to being on Indiana. I just don't. I think you're kind of paying the Curt Cignetti tax here, if you will, of the public and everyone on earth wanting to ride this wave across the finish line. And if you are someone that sees an advantage for Miami somewhere in this game, I think it's a really favorable number. I wouldn't blame you for betting it pregame whatsoever. To your point, we could see some late money coming in on Miami there. For me, as far as playing either side in this game, what I'm really hoping happens is for the first time in a month, Indiana doesn't create a turnover on the first drive and immediately start a game up 7-0. If Miami's able to take a 3-0 or even a 7-0 lead, I think I'm going to look to fire on Indiana live at Bet Rivers. But in terms of pregame, I just can't touch this spread. I have been looking closer at the under because I think both these defenses have been pretty dominant in this stretch. Obviously, the Oregon game ended at a crazy total, but that game was, a very unique game script that I just don't expect to happen in a national championship type environment. We talked about the coaching mismatch. We feel Indiana's obviously got the advantage with Curt Cignetti against Mario Cristobal. I really think there's a world where this Miami offense just sort of turtles on itself, and Carson Beck can make a couple negative plays, but that front seven for Indiana has been great. We know their secondary is really, really elite. I just don't see much of a way Miami wins this game other than controlling field position and playing the possession game. To me, if Miami hangs, it almost automatically implies they have success on the defensive end. Like if they cover, to me, I don't think it's going to be a 30-30 ball game. I think it's going to be a low scoring dogfight. If they don't cover, I still think there's a world that maybe Indiana, 31-10, something of that nature, and you still hit the under. I look at that as my strongest pregame lean, but like I said, it's just a lean as of right now. Let's get Troy in here for the first time. Troy wasn't on the show earlier this week, and now we've had a couple more days to see where the action has been headed. How are people betting this game, Troy?
Yeah, it should come as no surprise that Indiana is being backed very strongly on both outright spread as well. 80% of the money and 80% of the tickets on Indiana to win the game. 83% of the money and 73% of the tickets on Indiana to cover. It should be noted that the look-ahead line before the semifinal games, Indiana was favored by 5.5 points. Then once the semifinal games were decided, they opened at -7.5. That climbed up to 8.5, 9.5, and is now down to 8.5. And we really haven't seen too much money come back in on Miami. To Doug's point, I think that is going to happen over the next 2 or 3 days. From just a kind of a betting tip perspective, I couldn't agree more with to potentially split this game up. And if you're concerned about a large number with covering Indiana or even the under, which I am a fan of betting unders, I'm concerned about what will happen in the second half. Miami has played very stout defense in the first half, but Indiana has scored lots of points in the second half. Miami's obviously scored lots of points in the second half. As an under is better, I would be concerned about it being a very volatile second half and just having to hang on for hope that people don't score, and you don't want that. I understand why people bet the overs as well. Here's another interesting thing. So if we go back to September 20th, that was right around week 3. At the time, Indiana was 150-1, the longest odds they got all season to win the national championship game. They were still ranked in the top 15. They had won 3 games against nobodies. Miami had beaten Notre Dame, a ranked South Florida team, by lots of points, and then another nobody. What would that line had been at the time in Miami? Would have been heavily on Miami, I think. And so to see, certainly, Indiana, it just kept getting better and better and winning games. But I think there has been this misconception about Miami because they have 2 losses to ACC teams that like they were the number 2 team in the country. So, and they're playing at home. My second question is, how much does home field matter or count to Miami? Like they have to have one of the least significant home field advantages in power conference football. And we saw what Indiana did in Atlanta. So, if this was a neutral field, would it be Indiana same -8.5? Would it be, do they get those 3 points back? Because I don't know if this is going to be a Miami home game. Now, certainly the aspects of playing at home do matter. The comfort of sleeping in your own home, minimal travel, familiarity with facilities. But I don't think it's going to be a home game from a crowd standpoint. So this is one, if I really had to, I would split it up and bet take spread or over under on the first half and or second half, potentially live betting the second half if it is a sluggish first half, as we've seen with both of these teams throughout the latter stages of the season and the playoffs.
It's a great point, Troy. It's also just crazy to say out loud. Miami is playing a national championship game in Miami, and they may not have a home field advantage. That's really what to expect, but it's just kind of wild and maybe a statement on how both these programs operate and how both fan bases operate, that's what this is going to be. So there's prop markets as well here at Bet Rivers, and we didn't talk any props for the national championship game earlier this week, but I know Doug has some thoughts here. Where are you looking, Doug?
I think first thing first is what we talk about a lot in the Super Bowl is the MVP award, right? So Fernando Mendoza is -275 at Bet Rivers. Compare that to the Indiana money line, -345. So it's quite a bit, quite a difference. And I believe in the Rose Bowl, the O-line got the MVP, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if that can happen in the championship game where it's like so official and people bet on it. But I do think that's fascinating. I do think there are some options with Miami you can have some fun with, whether, I just think there's ways to attack this market. Like we really don't know how the game is going to play out. I mean, Carson Beck plus 675, pretty inviting when you figure it's the quarterback of a team that, how much you're going to be able to run on IU. So those interest me. The one guy that stands out, and it's going to be a sweat because he might get only 1 ball or 2 balls, but it's sort of their 4th receiver. Indiana's and that's EJ Williams Jr. And his prop is 11.5 from a receiving yards. There's no receptions right now, but I think he's going to be sort of the zone defense that the Canes play. And I'm getting this from a very sharp guy. So the zone defense the Canes play, he's sort of the zone buster. So relaying that that I was able to discuss with some people that I think is a really advantageous play. I wouldn't go crazy. He may not get a ball, he may not get a reception, but I think that's a good angle there. And I like those situations where you just need one catch in a way, because a guy like Zignetti, he's certainly going to scout an opposing defense that has zone, and I think that's the right play there.
He's got at least one catch in 13 of 14 games, and the 4 games he only finished with one catch. 3 of those 4 catches were for at least 12 yards. So that's certainly a good angle. I like that. And important to know the schematics when you're betting like this. Could be an interesting game for receiver props for Indiana. All right. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Troy. Obviously, we are looking forward to the national championship game on Monday. And we'll be back next week. Maybe we'll do a quick national championship recap after that game concludes. For now, we turn our attention to the college basketball slate. It's another great one this weekend as the season rolls along. And if you are betting college basketball with BetRivers this weekend, please do make note that we have our weekly profit boost promotion ongoing. We're giving out college basketball profit boosts from 20% to 50% throughout the week for live wagers on Tuesday, same game parlays on Wednesday, and regular parlays on Thursday. You can see the BetRivers app for more details. We start our college basketball games with Michigan State on the road at Washington here. And this is one of those lines that is currently sitting a couple points off of our projected line. We had Michigan State projected -5.5. Now it's the Spartans -3.5 on the road at the Huskies. Totals 139.5. Doug, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a really puzzling line. Now, I was on Michigan against Washington. Look, up 15 with the ball, minute 15 left. You think you're going to cover. You're about -400 to cover 12.5. Didn't get there, got bumped on some putbacks, but this is a different line. This is a tight game. The Sparty's been pretty solid on the road. Yeah, they went to Nebraska and lost, but that's nothing to sneeze at. I'm very puzzled by this game, by this line. I think they'll be ready. Had a nice rocking chair win against Indiana, and they'll be ready for this game. It's not like the next opponent on the Pacific Northwest road trip has their attention. Oregon's actually worse than Washington. So I think they're going to be all business, and Izzo will have these guys ready. I would have made this line 6.5, maybe even. I mean, if Michigan's laying 12.5, 13.5, that's where I would have had it. Ken Palm has 5. So I think it'd be very wise to just bet a large amount right now, and you can probably the line's going to move. The line's going to move, maybe in game. I do think the Huskies showed me a little something. They missed a lot of open shots. I know they were upset with the whistle or lack thereof. So I wonder if there's going to be a response there, just some human element there. With that being said, I got to lay the points with Sparty here.
So I was hoping this line would be where we projected it at around 5.5, maybe up to 6.5. And I got to be honest, I was going to fire on Washington if it was 5 or 6 here. And the fact that this is only 3.5 makes me wonder if I should fire on Washington money line here.
Yeah.
Here's a couple thoughts here. Number one, Michigan State was swept on their West Coast trip a year ago. Now, UCLA and USC last year, I think, were different beasts than either Washington or this woeful Oregon team. But, that was a lights-out Michigan State team that won 30 games, that had more talent than this year's team did. The only real stretch of poor play they had all season long began with when they had to go out west. And I don't know if that's going to be something that happens again. Maybe they'll be more prepared for this time. But, kind of similarly to we just accept with Mick Cronin and his stubborn old ways, we want to fade UCLA when they travel. I'm kind of there with Michigan State going to the West Coast. It wouldn't surprise me if Tom Izzo just resents these trips and there's a hint of negativity with this. I look at Washington. They're big. Right? They go too big. Hannes Steinbach is a legit pro, a lottery pick at the 4. They play him with Frank Kepnang at the 5, who is a legitimate shot blocker, rim protector. I think they held up really well against Michigan. I mean, in terms of the 2-point differential dominance that Michigan normally has, it was not as drastic as it normally is. And I think that bodes well against a Michigan State team that still struggles to score from the perimeter. You look at this, since the Duke game, in a 9-game sample size, Michigan State's offense is ranked 103rd in the country in adjusted offensive efficiency. They've been winning these games, but it's largely just due to this defense. Now, they could win this game with defense alone. I'm certainly saying it's possible, but at a certain point, you would think a team with those type of offensive struggles gets bit. Washington has the size to hold up to it. Yeah, I've talked myself into a Washington money line bet, boys. I don't love it, but I'm going with it, and we'll see if I'm fortunate or not. Let's move next to Minnesota and Illinois. Talk about a team that's been rolling. The Fighting Illini have been the number 1 team in the country in the last month, according to Bart Torvik. This line, I think, indicates that. Favored by 16.5 against Nico Medved's Gophers. Totals 140.5. What do you like, Doug?
It's a tough call here. Can Minnesota pick themselves up off the mat after the nice comeback but buzzer-beating loss to Wisconsin at home? They're going on the road. Greg, I know you've talked about the unders with this Illini squad. I just think Minnesota might get extended, although there's a little bit of a tax here. I thought it'd be 13.5 range, and I just can't lay the lumber with Illinois. But they've been really strong of late. I've been, pleasantly surprised by how they started in Iowa City. Just overall, I think they've been pretty buttoned up, and I don't want to get in front of them, although I do think it's just a little too many points. But as a guy who sweated out the end of Gonzaga last night and garbage time and breakaway layups with reserves playing, I have no desire to get involved at this point because I just think it's going to be right around the number, and I've gone back and forth on it.
Yeah, it is an enormous number, and it's so enormous that it's making me look further and further at Minnesota here. I think I'm going to go with a half unit play on the Gophers at plus 16.5. Illinois got some injury concerns. Keaton Wagler dealing with I believe a banged up hip that was dislocated or something that Brad Underwood just revealed today, an hour before the show. David Mirkovich came off the bench last game. Said the flu's going around. They caught it from the Iowa game. It's just sort of that mid-season, mid-January Brad Underwood team adversity that they always hit. Now, they overcame it to the tune of a win and a cover against Northwestern. My under did get a little dicey, but it did cash in that game. I'm not going to touch the total at 140.5 here, although I will point out that game against Northwestern was 59 possessions. Illinois used to play games in 80s possessions-wise, and Minnesota is one of the slowest teams in the country. So for me, I think this is one of the first lines that has been a little bit adjusted by the odds makers here. I'm not going to touch the under, but I will take Minnesota plus 16.5. If there's any thought to Underwood at resting Wagler or even Mirkovich against a lower tier conference opponent, I think Minnesota has a good chance of keeping this at least in the teens, the low teens, instead of up to 16, 17 range. Let's move next to a fun one between Darren DeVries and Ben McCollum, 2 first-year head coaches in this league. In Assembly Hall, both these teams could use a big win right now. Indiana favored just slightly at home here. The total 142.5. What do you like?
Yeah, you nailed it here. 5 combined straight wins. 3 for one team, 2 for the other. Man, I've gone back and forth. I think Iowa is probably the right side to start the game, but ultimately I think IU gets the win. I would have to play Indiana here. I think DeVries will have this team back, in no time. I just don't want to get involved. I think it's a coin flip game. I have been, it's almost like I've been pleasantly surprised by the Hawkeyes, but that's probably because I just have a low sort of bar for them to clear. Whereas I would expect Indiana to handle their business in this situation at home. You always got to wonder what's going on campus with the football team and everything. We talked about that last Friday night with the game going on, and then obviously playing Saturday against Nebraska, but they led them by 16 or 18 and blew it. I like the Hoosiers here. I think they get it done. I would have made this number 2.5, but it's a no play for me.
It's a stay away from me as well here, and it's really a prove-it game. I'm excited just to learn more about both of these teams. If I had to pinpoint what I've seen from both these teams this year, I want to trust Iowa more. I think Ben McCollum is a better coach than Darren DeVries. I think they have the best player on the floor in Bennett Sturtz. And really, if you look at Sturtz's struggles this year, they've come against elite perimeter defenders. Now, the question is, does Tate and Connerway qualify as that? Does Connor Enright qualify as that for Indiana? I don't think they do. There's a lot of mid-major up transfers on this Indiana roster that just haven't held up overly well in Big Ten play. I think Sturts is going to be comfortable enough to try and steal one on the road, but the great equalizer, as we know, is home court. This is Assembly Hall we're talking about, and Indiana has been a different team at home this year. So I'm just going to sit back and watch and see if I can learn some more about both of these coaches. Let's get Troy back in here. Troy, can you add anything for us on Iowa, Indiana?
Yeah, this is probably the most important Big Ten game of Saturday, I think. We certainly have a lot of ranked teams in action, but they're playing weaker sides. This is a really important matchup for both. Iowa having lost 3 in a row, Indiana lost 2 in a row, but Iowa has been, just on the road a ton. They've played, what is it? Like this will be their fourth home game or fourth road game in 6 games. Sometimes it does, shooting doesn't travel. They have great shooters. I lean the home team here, though. I think it is a stay away. Indiana can get juice at home. They can score more points. The bucket getting in this game could be great with Lamar Wilkerson, Bennett Sturts, Tucker DeVries shooting from outside. But I think even though, like you mentioned, Indiana is efficiently very good at defense. They rank in the top 40 in 3-point percentage efficiency and 2-point percentage efficiency on defense. This game has the feeling of an over to me. I think maybe a lot of points in just a little bit of a track meet in the second half. KenPom has this game around 145.5, and the line is at 142.5. I think it's going to be in the mid 140s, but for some reason, this has a feel of an over to me. And as I've mentioned, talking Indiana football, I like betting unders, but this is an instance just because I think the shooting is the potential for red hot shooting is very high in this game that I'd be leaning towards the overs in this one.
Yep, I like the over lean as well. Thank you for that added insight. Okay, next up, we have the Michigan Wolverines trying to complete their West Coast sweep in Eugene against an Oregon Ducks team riddled with injury concerns. Nate Biddle's status is up in the air. There were comments from Dana Altman yesterday that there are experts involved on the medical side. Will not be a surprise to see him scratched whatsoever. Meanwhile, Jackson Shellstad has missed multiple games in a row for the Ducks coming into this one. We project the line at 16.5, but I'll warn everybody here, depending on the status of Biddle, this line will move dramatically if he is out. The total projected at 156.5. Anything here, Doug?
Yeah, it's Michigan all day. Now, there is an element. Now, I wish this sort of schedule was flipped. I wish Michigan, off those 2 bad performances, got to go to Oregon first, and I think they would have slaughtered them. So they get the hard-fought, win and cover, nice push in the second half. Staying on the road. It's not an ideal spot, but I think talent ultimately prevails. It won't be the cleanest rocking chair win, but if Biddle's out, then that changes things. But I think, to your point, it's going to change the point spread. I think it's Michigan or pass. I don't think it's going to be one of those games like Gonzaga, Oregon, where the Ducks hung around. Oregon's only played well like 2 games, right? That Gonzaga game and then winning at Maryland. Other than that, the Ducks have just been sort of punked in a lot of ways. So I'm going to roll with the Wolverines here. But I do think, that last game, they had that urgency and wanted to get the bad taste out of their mouth of the previous 2 games. There's an element of relaxation going on, but I do think there's just too much talent. As long as everyone can crash the boards, because that was really pivotal in the win at Washington. A lot of help, the guards helped, the front line helped. I just think I just don't see Oregon hanging around and staying attached to Michigan here.
Yeah, I lean that way as well. And I think the only way I would play this game, given the injury concerns, we're kind of medically handicapping this. But, I think if this line is somewhere around 16, if you fire on that and Biddle's out, you feel like you've got amazing value and maybe you even have a middle opportunity here. I think even if Biddle does play, Michigan could certainly still win this game by 20. We saw them beat teams far better than Oregon by 30 and 40 earlier in the season. Just an urge of checking in with this Michigan team here. 3 straight games they failed to cover this pregame spread. They're playing like the 13th best team in the country per Bar Torvik in that span, not the first best team in the country. And I guess the question is this lull here to stay, or Are they going to snap out of it and get back to the form we saw for 2 months? I tend to think they will. There's been some weird things going on. Penn State scratched their best player before that Penn State game, and their scout was thrown off. Against Washington, we saw Des Claude, Wesley Yates, and Jacob Ognisevich all return from injury. I don't think Michigan knew that was going to happen. So there's been a lot of weird guys coming in and out of lineups against this Michigan team. If I had to guess, this Oregon team feels like one that almost like an NBA side sort of, hey, let's load manage. Nate, get out. You don't need to be here for this one. We know what's coming. We're a dead duck coming into this game. And I think there could be value on Michigan pregame if you get it around 16. Back to Troy one more time for us. Troy, what can you add?
Yeah, those previous 3 games is really the concern for Michigan. I think they win, obviously, but what the number is and can they get over that hump? If it's 18.5, I would have to stay away if it's a really high number. Not that I don't trust Michigan being a really good team, but you wonder about, certainly they don't rely a lot on freshmen, but they rely a lot on first-year players with the program. And there is that wall that you hit. The college basketball season is really, trimesters or even quarters where, they were exceptional through the first trimester. Now in the second trimester, they especially after the new year following that blowout win against USC, they've really been sluggish. And I think that's the $1 million question is this sluggish play here to stay? Will it continue? However, Oregon is just not very good. But sometimes I wonder how much the opponent actually matters, if it's more about what this team does and what they're doing. But here's the thing about Oregon: worst against the spread record in the conference, one of the worst in the country. I think they're 5-12 against the spread. Now, again, this all comes down to the number for me. It can't even go near the total because I think, it's all dependent on what the bad team puts up. And if it's a blowout, then you don't want to go near that because it could be way under or it could be way over if Michigan finds their winning ways or their covering ways, which they were doing early in the season. So for me, it would be Michigan if you can get it at a favorable number. I wholeheartedly agree with Greg that you jump early and with the hopes that you can get it at a shorter number, and then it booms up when Biddle is, if he's ruled out. But I just think that Oregon not being good against the spread, like, please tell me what their best win is or performance at home. Can't really find it, and I still trust this Michigan team, even though if they've lost some steam in their sails.
Yep, I think that's a totally fair way of framing it. All right, thank you very much, Troy. 2 more games here for this weekend. We turn next to Nebraska at Northwestern. The Cornhuskers still flawless, favored by 6.5 here in Evanston. Northwestern seeking their first Big Ten win of the season. I sang their praises on our show last week, where I thought analytically this team is better than their record. At a certain point, they're going to break through. It hasn't happened yet. This would be a fascinating time for them to steal one from the undefeated Cornhuskers. Totals 150.5 here. Doug, what do you think?
I think it's a cheap line. I have to go with the road chalk. I know it goes against everything, and I've been talking about the favorites here, whether it's Michigan, and I just think this is too short of a line. I don't think Nebraska has reached that complacency, we've arrived sort of moment where they don't have this chip on their shoulder. I think what they did to Oregon in the last game was impressive. They've had enough time. It's not a big, it's a road trip, but it's not this daunting thing like we see elsewhere in the Big Ten across multiple time zones. I think Nebraska wins this by 10 or more. I think the Huskers have obviously gotten everyone's attention, and they could. The comeback last Saturday really impressed me. When they were down double digits and came back, that really impressed me. And then they followed that up and just dropped the hammer. I think they're going to do the same here. Northwestern's fine. Like you said, they're winless in conference play. They're going to get it at some point. I just don't think they're going to stay attached to here. I think the line's too cheap.
Yeah, this is one we're finally lockstep in arm here. I love this number for Nebraska. I think Nebraska, more than any good team in this league, is extremely matchup dependent. And that's not said to discredit what they've done. Obviously, they can beat a lot of teams in different styles. You don't get to 17-0 without being capable of doing that. However, the style of defense that they play is so drastic. They swarm post touches, they recover, they scramble, and you've got to have shooters everywhere to beat Nebraska, or you've got to beat them up on the boards. And I just don't think Northwestern has either. This is a terrible shooting team. This is a team that really does not even get after it for second chances on the offensive glass. I think this is truly just going to come down to shot making. Northwestern, outside of Nick Martinelli, doesn't have any of those guys. You look at the success they had even in the Illinois game. It was all in the mid-range. Those shots are not there against this Nebraska defense. Ranked Mass, Price Sanford should have their way with the Northwestern defense. I think this is another coast blowout win for the Cornhuskers, and the train rolls on. One more game here. It's Purdue at USC. This is the first game for Purdue's West Coast trip this season. We expect the Boilers at -7.5. Total is 154.5 here. And actually, this is not a projected line. This is a locked-in line here at Bet Rivers. So what do you like here, Doug?
Nothing. These are two teams that I've had trouble figuring out, and I've looked to stay away, and they're playing each other, so I'm excited to watch. I've kind of, I guess, threaded the needle a little bit and faded Purdue in some first halves, and we've gotten home. Trojans have been relatively unimpressive. They also have battled the injury bug a little bit. I think it's a tricky spot for Purdue. Number feels right. I just don't know which version of the Trojans is going to show up, and thus don't need to play it. Over under, it feels a little low, but also don't want to get involved in that. But that would, if I had to play the game, I would lean to the over here, if anything.
Yeah, this is a stay away for me as well here. And if you want to handicap Chad Baker-Mazara's mental state, more power to you. That's not something I'm interested in. This guy is, I just think, the most volatile, great player in college basketball. And any given night, for no rhyme or reason, he's equally likely to give you a triple-double as he is to come off the bench in 8 minutes and do nothing, as he did his last time out against Maryland. The game before this, mind you, he had 29 points and 8 assists against Minnesota. He's been in and out of the lineup. I don't understand what is going on. I think he's healthy. I think this is just classic Baker-Mazara nonsense, and Eric Musselman doesn't know what to do with it. You look at this matchup, there's no one on Purdue's roster that should be able to guard Baker-Mazara at all. They don't have any wings that are bigger than 6'5" or good defenders. They're going to try CJ Cox on him likely, and if not, it's going to be Kaufman-Wren. That should be the most tasty matchup for CBM that he sees against a quality opponent this year. Everything should favor the home team here because of that. But every time you think Baker-Mazara is going to be brilliant because of a matchup, he's unplayable. That bit me once against Michigan State earlier this season, and I just don't want any part of it again. I do think this Purdue team is in a different mental state than they've ever been. Braden Smith is in the midst of what I think is the best 3-game stretch of his career. This team seems to have a little bit of a different edge to it, largely due to the depth options they have that they didn't have a year ago. So for me, it's a total stay away. My gut says Purdue probably finds a way to win comfortably, but that 7.5 number is right around where every Purdue game's been for about 2 weeks now. All right, that is everything we've got from a preview perspective for you this weekend. Let's close the show with our best bets. What are you going to lock in, Doug?
I have to be Nebraska. If that is in fact the line, I think it's a banger. Obviously, the other games that I spoke about, maybe Michigan, we'll see the status of Biddle, but it has to be. But EJ, you know what? I'll pivot. I'll go EJ Williams prop. I think that'll be my best bet, just because it's on the board at Bet Rivers, and we're not entirely sure the Nebraska one. So I'll go with the Williams over the prop, 11.5 receiving yards.
Love it. I think that's great. I'll be alongside you there. I'm also alongside you on Nebraska. So you have a certified double stamp from Doug and I there. I'll give out my own just as a separate one. I will take the Michigan early line. We projected at -16.5. I don't think Biddle's going to play, and I'm medically handicapping this. But if the 2 stars are both out for Oregon, this is a smash spot. I think Oregon's bench should not be able to keep this within 30 against Michigan. There you have it, folks. Thank you for watching the 10 again this week. Reminder, we are part of College Sports Rush here on the Bet Rivers Sports Network, where you can also get Sports Better's Paradise with Jimmy Ott every single week. We do this show twice a week, every Wednesday and Friday, and we'll be back next week as we will throughout all of college hoop season. Thank you for watching. Good luck this weekend, and we'll see you again next week.